Okay. Good evening, Tewksbury. It is 5:07 PM on Tuesday, November 12th. I'd like to call this meeting of the Tewksbury Board of Health to order. Two things I'd like to do tonight before we start. One, yes, it was Veterans Day. I would just like to take a chance, if there are any veterans in the audience, if you'd like to stand, we'd like to recognize you and thank you for your years of service. So, letting chance of people have a seat. If there are any veterans in the audience, I'd like you to stand up.
Families of veterans.
Now we'll go families of veterans. So I think that applies to just about everyone.
Not everyone.
Just about everyone here. So we thank you for your parents' service. And the next thing I'd like to do, which I'd like to try to start doing moving forward on the Board of Health, is if we can all stand, I'd like to just quickly say the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all. Okay. And if you've not been to one of these public hearings before, there's some format we have to do. So if it seems like you're doing some things repetitive of making a motion open and doing all that, that's just part of the process. We're making sure all I's are dotted and T's are crossed tonight. So first, I would like to read the letter that was sent to Mr. Olivier. That's the reason for the meeting tonight. So this is a letter that was dated November 7th, notice of public hearing. Please be advised that a public hearing has been scheduled by the Tewksbury Board of Health for Tuesday, November 12th, 2019 at 5:00 p.m. in the Tewksbury Town Hall, first floor, main hall. The purpose of the hearing shall be determined whether or not, 1, the permit for operating a custom slaughterhouse owned and operated by Dennis Olivier, 199 Marston Street, should be suspended, modified, or revoked, and/or the variance for the keeping of animals granted to Dennis Olivier, 199 Marston Street, should be suspended, modified, or revoked. This hearing is necessitated by a complaint and subsequent criminal charges resulting from the manner in which a cow was treated and killed. While you're aware of all the allegations related to this, and should you need copies of the reports, contact this office. You may, of course, be represented by a representative of your choosing, and you may present relevant evidence for the board's consideration. Please note that the level of the issues to be discussed at the board meeting may convene an executive session for a portion of that hearing. Okay. And the next thing I'd like to do is just have people who are at this table just briefly introduce who you are and what your role is here tonight.
Shannon Sullivan, sanitarian for the Tewksbury Health Department.
Susan Sawyer, Public Health Director for the Health Department.
Kevin Feely, Town Council.
Ray Barry, Chair, Tewksbury Board of Health.
Robert Scolano, Vice Chair, Tewksbury Board of Health.
Maria Zaroulis, Clerk, Tewksbury Board of Health.
Ashley Schimmel, Animal Control Officer and Animal Inspector.
Christine Gualtieri, Animal Control Officer, Animal Inspector.
Pamela Thomas, Animal Inspector.
And let the record show that while there are 5 members of the Board of Health, 3 are present tonight, so we do have enough to constitute a quorum should we get to a vote. Okay. So I'd like at this point for someone to make a motion to open the public hearing.
Motion to open the public hearing.
I will second that motion.
Okay. Motion's been put forth and second to open tonight's public hearing. All those in favor signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. Motion carries unanimously, 3-0. Okay. So again, as I said before the cameras are here, but again, now the cameras are on, we're going to be, this will be broken into several sections. The first will be an evidentiary portion, which is a chance for Mr. Olivieri or his representative to state their case. There'll be a chance for board members to ask that person questions. Once we feel that both sides have gotten the information we need or want to share, then we'll close the evidentiary portion and we'll open up a public portion where members of the public here are welcome to either come up to the microphone and make a statement, or we also will take statements that are written as well. Those will be read and entered into the minutes for the meeting as well. So one way or the other, your input will be recognized and collected. And then once we're done with that portion, once everyone has a chance to speak, or we run past a late enough time, we'll close the public portion, and then we'll enter into deliberations if we get that far tonight. And again, as housekeeping, whoever's going to be at the microphones, whether at the table here or at the podium, because it is being recorded, we want to make sure that you lean in towards the microphone to pull it toward you. And there'll be a sign-up sheet, and anyone that does come up in public we speak, we'll want to make sure that you put in your name and address as listed in that form. Okay. So moving into the hearing. If we'd like to open the evidentiary portion of the hearing, if someone would like to make a motion,
So made. Motion to open?
someone willing to second?
I will second that.
Okay, motion has been put forth and second to open the evidentiary portion of this hearing. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. We're now open for session. So if you'd like to, we have someone representing Mr. Olivieri here.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Don Bornstein. I'm an attorney. My office is located at 12 Chestnut Street in Andover. My office is Johnson and Bornstein, and I represent Dennis Oliveira.
Okay, and will he be here tonight? You just,
He will not be here tonight.
Okay.
I've specifically asked him not to attend, and I'll explain why when it's my opportunity to address the board.
okay. Welcome tonight. So is there anything either you two want to say for opening comments, or? Not that you need to.
No, just, Mr. Chairman, just very briefly, I know that the documents that the board has that have come into Susan Sawyer have been shared with council, and perhaps it would be most helpful to get the process at least started, to ask council if there's anything he wants to say in response to the documents that have been brought forth.
Okay, and I know, and I also just wanted to state too that I realize that in this country, one is presumed innocent until found guilty, and there is a ongoing criminal investigation, and we are trying to do our best to not go into that avenue at all, because in fairness to Mr. Olivieri, we want to make sure that we're dealing with the parts that we have direct influence over tonight. So is there anything you'd like to say for an opening statement?
There is. I also have a letter I'd like to hand out to the board, if that's okay, Mr.
Sure.
Chairman.
And you have copies for all of us?
Yes.
Okay.
I wasn't expecting this size crowd, but I think I have enough.
The board is not.
Yeah, just, there's three of us for the board, and then council and director, so we should be at 5 anyways.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that is, my copies are two-sided.
Okay.
Thank you.
So if you don't mind, just give me just a minute or two to read this.
Yeah, we should, that's fine.
Mr. Bornstein, let me just state one other thing, which I failed to mention at the start. Tonight, ultimately, my goal of this meeting is to make this really be a fact-finding meeting, because facts are still coming in. That's what I'm hoping tonight we can at least, the board can learn more facts, if at all possible, because in order to make a good, well-informed decision, obviously one has to have the facts before them.
Sure, I appreciate that.
Has everyone read the letter? Okay.
So first, I think I should be complimented that an attorney drafted a letter for this board, and it took you less than 3 minutes to read it. So I did want to keep my initial comments brief. And I don't mean to be glib in the face of some very significant allegations that were made in the reports that have been provided by the town. Very serious and disturbing allegations made in those reports, no doubt about it. But I think you do have to place it in context and also read the reports with the skepticism this process deserves, so you can determine as board members whether you've determined the truth of the situation that you're reviewing, because I think that's what you're trying to get to here. I would start with just putting this in some context. And I personally have some agricultural background. I grew up partly on a beef cattle farm, and understand that not everybody did. And Mr. Oliveira has spent his entire life in the farming community and agricultural business, but not everyone did. And the act of and business and life of raising livestock for meat production is a very honorable thing to do, and something that supports our country and the lifestyle that I think all of us, many of us, enjoy. But the acts necessary in raising livestock and the slaughtering of livestock can be disturbing and shocking when done in the best possible manner, especially if you end up witnessing them unexpectedly. And I think everything in those reports, at least in terms of the alleged eyewitness accounts, needs to be considered in that light. I do not know the gentlemen who were delivering propane to the farm that day. I don't know what their context was. I am speculating that they have not witnessed many livestock slaughtering events. And in fact, for both of them, might have been the first time. In fact, those eyewitness statements, the alleged eyewitness statements, say they were trying to collect their payment for their propane delivery so they could get off the farm and be on to their next stop when they witnessed what they thought they witnessed. That said, I think it's still important for this board to consider those witness statements. And the thing that is described in there, exceedingly gruesome, no doubt cruel, but I think an inaccurate description of what happened that day. Now, I have not completed an investigation of this. I have not even spoken to my client about the day's events. And for a few reasons, the primary one being I received notice of this late on Thursday. I know the board wanted to consider it right away at tonight's hearing, and I don't know that I think the chairman, as he stated at the beginning, that the investigation of this is ongoing. I think that's important. Certainly my investigation for Mr. Oliveira, and he has a separate criminal counsel as well. Our investigation is both proceeding, and we're not prepared to present that tonight, which is why the conclusion of my letter is we're requesting that the board continue this, not to ignore it, but to find out what really happened and what the truth of the matter is. Because this is a very serious accusation, serious enough that I asked my client to stay home because it upsets him so much. Both the accusation that's been made against him, that people would believe he would do that thing, and then also the fear of losing his farm that he's owned and operated for 45 years in the town of Tewksbury. So I'm glad to hear the chairman's initial statement was we want to get to the truth of this matter, and I do too. That said, I think you can start with some skepticism of those eyewitness accounts. These alleged accounts of what happened there, their statements say And I don't want to belabor the gruesome aspect of this, but the statements say that a cow was chained at the neck and a foot, and then the head was torn off with a small bobcat machine. I would suggest that that thing is, number one, physically impossible to do. That either the bobcat would be incapable of doing that gruesome thing, or that the leg would have broken long before the thing that happened actually happened. I think the logical conclusion to this, and this isn't based on statements from my client, it's based on just the bit of paperwork that had been provided by the town, that the thing that is described as the eyewitness account did not happen because it could not have happened. So I'd start with that. To the extent any statements have been attributed to either Mr. Oliveira or his farm worker identified as Freddie in those reports, Mr. Oliveira immigrated to this country at the age of 16 from the Azores, the Portuguese Azores. His first language is Portuguese. He suffered a stroke several years ago. It significantly impacts his speech, also impacts his ability to process speech. His intellectual ability is still appropriate and capable, but his ability to process speech and his ability to speak is hampered. And my understanding is that his worker, Freddie, that his native and first language is not English, and that his ability to understand English speech, especially in the context we're talking about here, is at least very limited. So statements, I think, attributed to either of them need to be looked at with skepticism. And then lastly, and maybe most importantly, is to compare the exceedingly disturbing acts described, alleged in those eyewitness accounts with Mr. Oliveira, his background, and the operations of the Oliveira farm over the years. As I said, he immigrated to this country when he was 16. He volunteered to fight in Vietnam. He was deployed in Vietnam. He was a combat field medic. He's a decorated war veteran. He has a box full of medals. He was wounded in the war, both physically and mentally. He's a disabled war veteran. He continues to suffer from PTSD decades later. When he came home from the war, though, he was determined to make a life for himself. He went and worked in the meatpacking industry in Boston. He had a background and was raised in the farming community in the Azores, so he had that experience behind him. He worked at the Tewksbury Hospital with animals, and also learned the trade of caring for livestock and also slaughtering livestock, I believe, in both those occupations. He eventually bought himself a small farm here in Tewksbury to raise livestock and to carry on agriculture. And he's been doing that for 45 years. I came to know him 4 or 5 years ago in the context of another permitting issue, a licensing issue. I'm a land use attorney. I'm a real estate attorney. I came to know him through that context. I spent significant time with him on his farm. To hear him talk about the animals on his farm and the care he takes is impressive. And when I read these reports and what he's accused of through those reports compared to the man that I met, there's a missing piece. There's certainly more to the story, and more to the story that this board needs to hear. With us tonight are his friends and family and several people who have come out to speak in his support if we reach that point in what we're doing tonight. But I think it would very much behoove this board to suspend the evidentiary portion of the board's actions on this matter and allow both myself and Mr. Oliveira's team to complete our investigation and for you to complete your investigation. Because to accuse this man or convict this man, even in this civil context, of this terrible thing, and to deprive him of his livelihood and the 45-year background that he spent on this farm would be a travesty if it was not done with the best investigation and determination of the facts that was possible. And I think that could not have been done by this point in time. I believe there are people who have not given statements, who would have information to provide that may directly contradict what you have in your record now. I'm not prepared to present that tonight, but I believe that would be available to the board, and I think it would be very reasonable of the board to continue the evidentiary aspect of this proceeding until both the board and the town staff and Mr. Oliver and his team have really gotten to the bottom of what happened here. If there are conditions or a plan or something that the board would like to discuss to make sure that there are not cruel or inhumane activities taking place on that farm, I do not believe Mr. Oliveira would oppose that in the least. I think he's very proud of the work he does. I think he's very proud of even the most difficult aspect of the work that he does in that farm and raising meat livestock, which is taking their life. I think he's very proud of the way he does that and the compassion he shows and the professionalism he does that with. So I would have to speak to him about how we might proceed on that vein, but the thought of this board being able to maintain a close eye on his operations until this process is done, I think would be something that could be, discussed and agreed on.
Okay. I have just a couple of comments to make, and then I'll pass it over to my fellow board members. I guess first and foremost, we're in an awkward position tonight because when you hear of the purported issue that happened, we as serving the residents would really not be looked upon the correct mode if we were just to look the other way. So by nature of what we do and having permits involved with this, we need to at least hold the hearing such as tonight and to really establish, find facts and more facts and to determine what, if anything, we may need to do for action, if anything. But we also have to balance that with, we recognize that for those that are seeking out meat that's slaughtered according to either kosher or halal specifications, there are not many places around that do it. So he's serving a very important need of the community. And seeing the folks that are out here tonight and his support, I think is testament to that. So we recognize that there is a definite need to have the ability for folks to get meat that are slaughtered in accordance with their religious practices. And we are by no means here tonight trying to deny anyone that ability to get meat done in accordance with their religious background. So let me just let you know that we are all very supportive of the religious side. Especially for me, because I have two uncles that are priests, and one did a lot of work with conflict negotiation in the Middle East and was heavily involved with religious aspects of conflict resolution. So I grew up in his footsteps, so I'm very aware of the importance of supporting people's religious beliefs, and we as a board are not trying to do anything to quash that by any means. Coming back to what you might be able to take back to your client. Two of the things that I was surprised about, and for as long as I've known about this operation, I was on the board when he came before us back in 2014 to get the permit for the custom slaughterhouse. So I have some familiarity with his practices. And in reading, going through the health department's files, yeah, it does seem out of character for what we hear in the report, which is why we're trying not to come to any rash decision. And it's the least we can offer your client is that we really need to go through and do a thorough investigation and find out what actually are the facts and what, if anything, needs to be done. In looking at the variance that we had given for the custom slaughterhouse, one of the requirements in that variance was that all slaughter was to be done in the slaughterhouse. Primary reason is that we know that members of the public go on that property to purchase the animals before they're slaughtered. And to your point, if someone has not seen an animal slaughtered before, it could be an uncomfortable sight for them, especially if they're queasy at the sight of blood. So if there was something I would have you take back to your client would be the fact that they really need to ensure that slaughtering is done within the confines of the slaughterhouse so that anyone that is on the property, whether as a customer or in the course of doing business, making a delivery to that property, they don't come across a slaughter being performed. So that, again, that's just my speaking. I'm sure if we have things that will put forth a motion for that, but that was just one of the immediate things, was just slaughtering needs to be done within the confines of the building. And I understand that there is the appropriate, Ashley, for you, what was that term you used for the pen where the cow is properly slaughtered? The chute, okay. So I understand that, and in doing research about what the requirements are for ensuring that the slaughter of a cow is done in full accordance with kosher or halal requirements, that everything seems to talk about using a chute, which I understand there is one there in the slaughterhouse. So it's not that he doesn't have the equipment, it's just making sure that slaughter is done in the appropriate place. And again, that's no statement about what I think he did outside the facility, but just it seemed like if the slaughtering was done outside, it should have been done in the slaughterhouse. So that, to me, would be one clear thing he could at least do in this interim. So I'll pass it off to my colleague.
Good evening. Thanks for coming. I understand why your client's not here, and we respect Mr. Oliveira, even if he isn't here. And we fully understand the reasons why he's not. With that, do you have the ability to bind him this evening if the board were to propose some resolution, interim or otherwise?
I would need to contact them depending on the terms of that, but that would be possible.
So that would be something that you'd be able to reach him and possibly come to a resolution tonight if that was being offered?
I believe I would, and I would certainly try.
Okay. I know that you discussed Dennis's service, you discussed his background. Some of the things that I did hear lead me to believe that there's a possibility that operating this facility may be beyond his capabilities at this time. Do you think that that's an accurate statement?
No, I believe it's a completely inaccurate statement.
Okay. And do you understand how many people work under him at the farm? Do you have a complete understanding of what the operation consists of over there?
I do not have a complete understanding of his current operations. As I explained at the beginning of my statement, my investigation is very much at the beginning, and it has been 4 or 5 years since I've worked directly or actively with Mr. Oliveira regarding issues at his farm.
Is there some manner of record keeping or employees or other assistance available to you that would help describe his operation so that we might be able to come up with something that would be palatable this evening?
I believe that would be possible. I do have both his sister and his son, I believe, are in the audience with us tonight. And they're certainly in close touch with Mr. Oliveira, and they may have some of that information that they could share with me.
Okay. I know that the ability to communicate seems to be somewhat limited for Mr. Oliveira, but he understands the nature of these allegations and circumstances. You wouldn't have any question to that, correct?
I personally do not have any doubt of that he understands he's been accused of something serious.
You familiar with the regulations as it relates to the keeping of animals in Tewksbury? Have you familiarized yourself with the regulations themselves?
I have in the past, and I'm generally familiar with them.
Okay. They have been amended as of 2018, is that?
Yep.
So they have been updated as of 2018, and certainly we're looking at the regulations as amended. I believe it was May of 2018, if I'm accurate.
And actually, if you don't, I made a copy of the current regulations.
You want this for?
Yep. Dory, you won't be quizzed in that tonight, but just for your reference.
It is a hearing based on the keeping of animal permit. That's why we're here. Obviously, any action that the board would consider, I think, is related to public health and safety. So I think your comments are well taken about facts and rushing to judgment on facts. I don't think this is a board that would do that in any event. And they would take into consideration what was necessary to apply it to their jurisdictional limitations. And we believe that you being here tonight and having some supporters here in support of his operation are a sign that we can listen, take it in, and hopefully we can have some discussion about what alternatives are available to us within our jurisdiction. With that, I'll pass it back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Mr. Rose?
My main question really has more to do with the manner in which this animal was allegedly killed, but because it's an ongoing criminal investigation, and it sounds like there may be more information that we don't all have yet, I'm going to hold off on asking anything related to that. So, pass it back to Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Mr. Field, anything you'd like to add to our conversation?
Just, if I could just ask one or two quick questions, just procedural, Don. Do you have a sense as to when you would be able to get the additional information to the board that you've mentioned? For instance, if you were going to get statements from other witnesses and/or any facts that are different than what is in the reports that have been provided?
Sure, I don't know that I'm prepared to identify a hard deadline for when that would be completed. I am meeting with Mr. Oliveira's team, I expect, on this Thursday afternoon. We have several folks who will attend that discussion, and I think at that we will have a much more firm game plan for completing the investigation that I've suggested.
That's all I had for now, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
I have one more follow-up question.
Go ahead.
Since the incident, would you describe the operations at the farm as ongoing? Would you describe them as interrupted? Would you describe them as ceased? How would you describe the operations ongoing at the farm today and since the date of the incident?
The short answer to that question, Mr. Scarano, is I don't know. I can say I would certainly believe that there are operations proceeding. I believe there's livestock on the farm now, and I believe they're being cared for appropriately, so that operation would certainly be proceeding. As far as any other operations on the farm, at this moment, I don't have that information for you.
I think it would be important for the board to know what the operations are, and I think I'm swinging back to my original question. Maybe that should be investigated and determined and submitted so that we have a clear understanding of what's going on at the farm. I think that would go a long way in making a determination as to what's necessary, one way or the other, whether interim, final, or preliminary, as a reaction from the board. but you've come here with a little bit of a skimpy informational set. I don't know if we shouldn't take a couple of minutes, because I think it's important that we understand what's going on at the farm, who's operating it, how many employees that are there, and I'd really like you just to answer those preliminary questions for me so that I will be at least somewhat informed before I make any kind of decision whether to continue or otherwise this evening.
Sure, I think that would be appropriate to take a short adjournment for that. And I would also suggest that I believe I would be very open to providing this board with a more detailed interim report, an initial report within just a few days, probably early next week. Provide you with a report of basic facts and figures, basic information. And I suspect after the meeting that I've suggested that Mr. Oliveira's team will be having on Thursday afternoon, we'll be able to provide a description of how we'll be proceeding. We'll be able to submit that to the board with an action plan, in essence, for going forward in the short term.
Would you like to take a couple of minutes to see if he'd be able to answer that question?
Sure, and then one other thing, just to add on to that question, you had alluded to in your earlier statement that if we were to come up with some interim recommendation, that you would entertain bringing to your client, as well as some way of being able to potentially monitor whether that is actually occurring or not. So I would just, when you do speak with the client, I'd just be curious to know if we were to ask of anything, as a minimum, just off the top of my head, of making sure that slaughters are confined to the slaughterhouse until we can reach a final decision, how that might be doable. Because we can't afford to have someone from the health department be camped out there watching everything happening. So absent of that, how can we know that what we're asking is actually being carried out?
Sure, and I'm absolutely happy if we take a short adjournment. I'll speak to Mr. Oliveira's family members and see if I can return to my seat with some more information for you.
Okay, figure like 5-10 minutes should be enough, or do you need a little longer?
That should be plenty.
It's the only hearing we have tonight, so I'm not holding anything else up. Okay, so let's say we'll take a 10-minute adjournment. Okay,
Thank you.
it is 5:45, so we'll take a 10-minute adjournment.
Thank you.
Okay, we are now live again. Okay, so it is 6:00 PM, so we're coming out of our adjournment. Attorney?
Thank you. So if I understood the question that was posed before I took our adjournment right, there were really two of them. One was the number and nature of the employees or folks who are working on the farm. So I am informed that the operation is as it has been for several years. Mr. Oliveira very much operates and manages the farm along with the assistance of two long-term farm hands who have been with him for some time. And he has operated the farm like that and intends to continue operating the farm like that in the manner that he has for many years. As far as any slaughtering activities taking place outside the slaughterhouse, I'm told that is not an issue, that any slaughtering activities would be confined to the slaughterhouse. As far as the ability of Mr. Oliveira to continue operating the farm, I know I haven't seen him actually out doing farm work for 4 or 5 years, but I can tell you that at that time, if you had told me that he was 72 years old, I would have called you a liar, because he was as spry and as strong as, certainly more than me, his abilities as in the agricultural work that he does, I think, are very high. And I don't want to leave this board with any sort of impression that they are compromised by his medical conditions. These medical conditions are not new, and he's operated the farm with those medical conditions for some time. And I do not want to leave the impression that he's not capable of continuing to do that. I'm told he very much is, and my personal observation of him 4 or 5 years ago is that he very much was. And his intention is to continue to operate the farm like he has for many, many years. And as far as slaughtering activities, they would be contained within the licensed and permitted slaughterhouse. And he is subject to routine inspection by both the town and the state, and I believe has already received his annual inspection from the town and passed it without issue, and receives interim periodic inspections by the state as well.
Okay, well, thank you for those answers. If you want to.
I honestly believe that when these types of allegations come to light, that they deserve as much sunlight as possible, both for the benefit of your client, the public, and the residents of Tewksbury. So I'd be inclined to grant some time for that sunlight, but it would be conditional. And I'm gonna just give you my thoughts. Because when I hear these allegations, I think it affects people's ability to make decisions and good decisions. In all due respect to your client, being the age he is, and having some of the limitations he has, which are clearly present, I feel that taking a step back from the operations at this point would be the logical thing to do, while he goes through what it is that he has to go through on a personal basis, on a professional basis, and in front of Massachusetts courts. So my feelings are that Mr. Oliveira has the ability to replace himself on the farm. He has the ability to hire someone else to do what it is that he does, so that he could take a step back and you could deal with some of the facts that are out there. You could assemble some of the facts that are necessary for the board to make an informed decision before any final action is taken. So my feeling is that some interim action should be taken for the protection of everyone involved, including the public, including the residents of Tewksbury, and including your client and their family. So rather than have an operation continue the way it is currently being operated with the employees that he has, it would seem to me that you have this opportunity to actually enter into some interim operational agreement so that everyone would have this bit of space to do what it is they would like to do. And I know what your professional obligation is to provide the board with some semblance of some facts so that we can be fully informed. So I'm asking right out, do you think that replacing Mr. Oliveira on an interim and temporary basis until some of this plays out and we can get some of the facts in front of the boards is a good decision? Because I would be basing what I would be doing tonight on your response.
I haven't asked him that question, and I don't think it would be a good decision to replace Mr. Oliveira. He's operated that farm for 45 years. He's still capable of doing it. There's nothing in your record that suggests otherwise. And I think it would be appropriate for him to continue working on the farm. But I have not discussed that issue with him because it's just been raised to me.
Well, I certainly want to give you the time, and this is just my thoughts. There's other folks here that may have different thoughts, including something entirely different. But my thoughts are that I think that it should be suggested, and I think it would benefit the board and the community if we had an operational agreement, which we don't have now. What we have now is we have the facts in front of us, as twisted as they are and as unclear as they are, for us to make a decision on whether or not this operation should continue unabated with the facts as present. I don't want to make a determination of those facts. It's not my job to make a determination of those facts. All it is as a duty to the public and to the community, is for me to determine whether or not there's a public safety issue related to the operation down there, number one. And the safety I'm talking about is the jurisdiction of the Board of Health. And number two, if in fact there is an operation going down there, it is in compliance with the permits that were issued. There's a permit that was issued. There was a variance granted. Those terms are in front of us this evening. I'm wondering, do you have a copy of the variance that was granted to Mr. Oliveira when the permit was actually issued?
It was provided to me today.
Okay. Did you get a chance to look at it?
Briefly, I did.
Briefly. That's, I would, in your position, I would rather have a more extended period of time to review that, to review the terms of the permit, to see if I could stay in compliance with them. But you can understand my two concerns. My two concerns are compliance with the permit, because that allows us to modify it if it isn't in compliance. And the other one is that I think that it would benefit everybody involved if there was some step back and the possibility that, and it would be not prejudicial, and nor would we hold it as prejudicial if you were to enter into this kind of interim agreement while we had the ability to review and you had the ability to provide more information to us in the possibility that we would be persuaded to do something different. That's my point.
Okay, and I'll give sort of my spin of what Mr. Scarano just said. My suggested thought was more along the lines of, rather than have Mr. Olivieri be fully removed from the operations day to day, have his work be confined to the keeping and maintaining of the animals and bring them in from auction onto the property, and to entertain having someone be brought in whose sole job is to perform the slaughters. So then we know that the slaughters are being always done in the correct and prescribed manner and in the correct location. Because it seemed like there was a bit of a question and concern about the manner of how this one animal was slaughtered, and if he was more taking care of maintain the animals, and then someone was brought in just to do the slaughter piece, might that be an alternative option? Then he still has his hand in doing what he enjoys doing, but then we also have at least someone that's just solely focused on the slaughter side.
I could ask him to investigate that. I could ask him to look into that possibility. There's certainly nothing that could be committed tonight, even if I had him with me. The idea that someone with that experience, comparable to his, would be readily available to do that strikes me as unlikely. But I would certainly ask him to both investigate that and consider that option.
Well, my other way of looking at it too, and again, our role is not to help folks with business decisions. But as he's getting up there in years, and the people that are here tonight are many years younger than him, and they're going to want to continue to look for a source of meat that's slaughtered in accordance with their religious practices. I look at it as also sort of a succession plan, that someone then is able to come in and be trained in the proper ways of doing it so that this operation can keep on continuing and providing a needed service to the religious community here that's well represented. So that's my personal view of this, is I think that there's an opportunity here to provide even a higher level service to the customers, and something that would be more longer-term solution. So that's how I'm thinking of it.
Sure, and I think I understand the suggestion a little better now. But again, I'll note it's certainly something I would be happy to discuss with him and investigate with him. It's not something I could commit to for him tonight.
And honestly, I don't know if it's even possible, because I'm not an expert in this either, so I don't know. I'm sure it's not something you find on LinkedIn for someone that can do the slaughtering, but just as a thought.
Yes, and nationwide, it is an underrepresented profession.
We're recognizing that.
Yeah.
Yes.
We're recognizing that by our suggestions this evening. If I wasn't clear enough, that's exactly what I was suggesting. And I'm not adverse to adopting the chairman's or part of the chairman's suggestions here. What I am telling you is that it is incumbent upon Mr. Oliveira to come forward with a plan, an operational plan, that satisfies the board that we are within our purview to act without reacting or overacting. Because when you came in here, that's what was happening. There was a lot of reaction, there was a lot of overacting, but the charges are so serious, they're so out of the ordinary, that it's not for us to make these factual determinations. It's up to us to ask you to provide a comfort level of operation over there on Marston Street so that the board is comfortable, the community is comfortable, the officers that are here are comfortable, that nothing like that is going to be possible in the future. And I think it's within your power, in your hands, to give us that operational guide and to give us the suggestions. The amount of support that Mr. Oliveira has here is overwhelming. And I know that if they were participating this evening, they're rolling over in their minds right now what they could do for Mr. Oliveira. I think that giving the attorney some time to perfect or propose such a plan, and I'm just going to bounce this off the town attorney quickly, would you suggest a period of time in order to reconvene this, or would you?
Yes, I think that makes a lot of sense to me, especially since the first thing we heard is that, I think what can be agreed to tonight is that all slaughtering will only take place in the slaughterhouse. So that can be agreed to tonight, I believe. And that then, Mr. Scarano, I think the board has another meeting scheduled later in the month, and that perhaps having a operational plan, and any other supporting documents submitted to the board, say 48 hours before that meeting. Is that my alarm? Would give, would give you all time to consider it, and would give Mr. Oliveira time to consult with counsel and submit an appropriate plan.
I would agree, and thank you for clarifying that. I'll bring it back to the chairman for anything further.
Yeah, so our next meeting is scheduled for November 21st, so a week from Thursday. Because by calendar, we routinely meet the third Thursday of every month. So I don't know if that would give you time to come back with any preliminary facts or anything to help us advance discussions.
I think it should. It's a little more than a week, but, and I'd like to make two comments just in response to Mr. Scarano's, I think, comments, which I take well, and I don't want to give an impression otherwise. There's no contest here that the things that are alleged are serious things that this board needs to consider and get to the bottom of. That is not something that I'm suggesting otherwise on. I'm just suggesting when you get to the bottom of it, I think you're going to find those allegations are not the correct story. Secondly, to request that Mr. Oliveira provide the board with a description and a game plan for how he's proceeding in his business and with the operation of his farm, I think is a reasonable thing to ask. And I would certainly, we already have a meeting scheduled for Thursday afternoon to do several things, including that thing. So to report back to the board by the following Thursday should give us some amount of time to put together the information I think you're looking for.
And just in response, to let you know, we are completely open-minded with the allegations here. We're not here as fact finders. We never assemble to determine facts. We only assemble to determine what's in the public health's best interest. So with that, you can be assured that we'll keep an open frame of reference to all of these things, even with the material that you submit. But thank you for that.
And I'll just follow that. I think I speak for the board that for us, it's not an easy or a simple decision just to suspend or revoke permits or variances. We look at that really as a means of last resort. And we as a board, as of late, we've been trying to come up with more proactive solutions with the person sitting on your side of the table that don't require us to have to go to that level. So we've been trying to come to mutual understandings with folks that have had issues before us. Because our goal is not to shut anyone down. We're trying to come up with ways that we can continue the operation, but in a manner that improves the health and safety of the residents and of the customers that may be using it. So that's really our sole focus. So I would just add that if there's a chance you could, for November 21st meeting, if you could at least, at your meeting Thursday, also ask the question of, and whether you frame it as a succession plan or not, but just in order to ensure there's a supplier of meat that's slaughtered according to specific religious practices. If that service can continue to go on into the future, it really helps to get someone trained to do that, so that can continue supplying the folks that are here tonight as well as others that did not show tonight. If that's something that even a preliminary idea for 21st meeting would be good, just as a way of knowing that you are making efforts to sort of like document what you're doing today, but also giving thought to how would you do this tomorrow.
And since we're not moving forward with any decision this evening, unless it's imperative for you to speak this evening on on what we've discussed here, I'd ask you to reserve your comments until the public hearing, which is scheduled for November,
We're going with the 21st, is that what you're saying?
yeah, the 21st. I'm not asking anyone to give up their rights, but in the instance where you have the public hearing to speak, you might be better served to reserve those comments, because we really don't want to be persuaded by facts. We understand that everyone is entitled to a fair and impartial hearing. That's what we're going to give Mr. Oliveira on all of these issues. And we would just like his attorney and counsel, and he has a team who is not here, to be able to do that. So if it's not imperative for you to speak, we'd like you to waive that and wait till the public hearing on the 21st.
And just to add to that, I hope you really do heed what I had mentioned early on, that we definitely recognize the religious significance of slaughter done according to your religious practices, and we are by no means trying to end that, stop that. We are trying to come up with a solution that continue to provide the services that you need, but also in a manner that conforms to our regulations as well, which I'm sure should be very doable. So I guess I'll ask, Attorney, so technically we're still in the evidentiary, so we would then continue the evidentiary portion of the hearing to next month?
Correct, Mr. Chairman. A motion to continue the hearing until November 21st at whatever time you set, 6 PM or 5 PM would be appropriate.
Okay. I'm going to make that motion that we continue the evidentiary portion of the public hearing until November 21st. It would be the first item on the list, I believe,
Yeah, we'll make
at
it.
6 PM.
I will second that motion.
Okay, so the motion's been put forth and second to continue the evidentiary portions hearing to our meeting on November 21st. All those in favor signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. Motion carries unanimously, 3-0.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, one point of clarification. If folks have shown up tonight to speak in support of the Oliveira Farm, they would have the opportunity to do that on the 21st if they didn't do it tonight.
They would.
Right, and you folks also have the chance to submit something in writing to the Health Department, which will in turn be entered into our record as well. So if you are not able to come on the 21st, and by all means, we're not trying to discourage people from commenting, but if you're not able to make it to that meeting, please feel free to submit something in writing as well to the Health Department. That helps us as well, so we really encourage that if you were willing to do that.
And we'll make that part of the record, correct?
Yes, yes, yes. Anything submitted would be part of the record. And on that point, Mr. Chairman, Dawn, if you have the chance to send an email to Susan just on the agreement that all animals will be slaughtered in the slaughterhouse, that would be helpful, just for the purpose of the record.
Happy to do that.
And thank you for all you folks that came out tonight, because it is a great show of support for Mr. Oliveira and for what we're trying to do as well. So thank you all for coming tonight.
All right. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
Did you motion to adjourn? Is the meeting over? Did you have anything else?
Actually, let's, yeah, we should,
You want to add to the agenda? You're going to add something to the agenda, is that what I'm
you
hearing?
want to add something to the agenda?
No, what I did want to do is make sure that the animal regulations, right, that we're talking about, are part of this document. Okay, that's what I want.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so let's make an adjournment to end tonight's meeting, since Mr. Rue's not here.
I will make a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, motion's been put forth and second to adjourn tonight's Board of Health meeting. It is 6:24 PM. All those in favor signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. Meeting is adjourned. Good night, Tewksbury.
Good night, Tewksbury.